So, shame is a powerful but often unrecognized force that impacts how gay and bi men interact with each other. So, what's going on here? What is shame? How does it affect us? And what can we do about it? Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Better Gay Dating Podcast, the podcast about the art and science of deeper connection as men who date men. My name is Ed. I'm a dating and relationship coach for gay and bi men. So yes, it's not always super fun to talk about, but shame really can impact how gay and bi men see ourselves and how we show up in our relationships. Because if you've ever been in a situation where you felt fundamentally not good enough, or where you wanted to speak your mind but didn't, or just where a promising connection ended and left you feeling shell-shocked and hurt, shame may well have been a factor. But what is shame, and why are we as queer men especially susceptible to it? So shame isn't just temporary embarrassment or the feeling we did something wrong. In fact, shame isn't really a feeling at all. It's a fundamental belief that we're wrong or unacceptable in some way. So guilt is the feeling we did something wrong, but shame is the feeling that we are wrong, that there's something fundamentally and maybe unchangeably wrong with us. So if we make a mistake, it's because we're a bad or careless person. If we don't get what we want, it's because we fundamentally don't deserve it. Or if someone treats us poorly, it's because we fundamentally think we do. And here's the thing, shame affects most people. Most people have that thought of, am I fundamentally okay sometimes? What varies between people is how often this thought comes up, how we respond to it, positively or negatively, and what situations especially trigger it. Because yes, on average, gay and bi men are substantially more prone to feeling shame than the population overall, or at least for us, our sexual or romantic identity is an extra factor that can create a very specific type of shame. Most of us have been in environments where it was clear that being gay or queer is unacceptable, abnormal, or just bad. We felt othered, excluded, or even that being attracted to other guys is something wrong that we either have to fix or just never act on. And often we started experiencing this before we even knew we were gay or queer, and definitely before we had the perspective, self-assurance, or just the words to know how to deal with it. Maybe you heard someone talk about how gay sex is disgusting or unnatural, or you knew someone who came out and got disowned by his family or friends, or maybe it wasn't that you explicitly learned that being gay was bad, you just never saw gay people represented in mainstream media and figured it must not be something worth celebrating or even acknowledging. But whatever it was, as queer people, we pick up all these big and small signals about who we are. At worst, we learn that being queer is wrong and shameful, and at best, we learn that it's something different and definitely less than compared to being straight and cisgender. And sure, radical idea, I know, but what if being queer is something to celebrate? What if it's just part of the natural diversity in the human population? What if getting mad at queer people naturally existing is basically the same as getting mad at clouds or mountains for existing? But this is why this bias or prejudice on a societal level, most queer people carry some shame about who we fundamentally are. You literally need to be raised by gay penguins in Antarctica to completely avoid it. And yeah, shame sucks. It's often not something we want to admit to carrying, and we can even feel shame about feeling shame. But as you'll see, shame does massively and especially impact how we show up in our relationships. But most of us do carry shame in ways we don't realize. And if we don't know that, we don't understand how it's impacting us and can't do anything to reduce its impact. Because yeah, shame is often pretty sneaky. You don't get a notification that pops up and says, hey, you might be acting out of shame. Are you sure you want to do that? It often shows up as avoidance, self-sabotage, or playing small, or it just shows up as feeling deeply rejected or unworthy when things don't go our way. And yeah, shame shows up in all kinds of environments, friendships, work, family relationships, and we could talk about them all. But in this episode, I'm going to focus on how shame often shows up in our close relationships, how it creates disconnection, cuts us off from love, or just makes building and sustaining relationships much harder than it should be. So let's break this down. I'm going to talk about 5 common ways shame can really fuck up our relationships, and then what we can do to tackle the shame that underpins them. So first, shame often causes us to stay in situations that aren't right for us and actively avoid situations that really are. I spoke about this a few episodes ago. We often choose partners who aren't right for us because we don't believe we deserve better. If we believe there's something fundamentally wrong with us on some level, we might just believe that we deserve a relationship that feels wrong on some level. There's often a comfortable familiarity in being in a place where we're not truly happy or fulfilled if we think it's all we deserve. But at the same time, shame can make us actively avoid situations that are right for us because we don't think we deserve them, or because we've told ourselves we're bad or wrong for wanting them. And if that sounds self-sabotaging, well, yeah, it is, because here's the thing, our self-image can also be kind of sneaky sometimes. Psychologically, we often ground ourselves in our identity or self-image first, then accept or dismiss external feedback based on how well it validates that self-image. In short, it happens because our brains love consistency, especially when it comes to the way we see ourselves. So it's easy to stay stuck in what we believe about ourselves, even if those beliefs aren't helpful or true. And it means that if something threatens our self-image, we often overlook or dismiss that evidence because adjusting your self-image often feels risky or confronting, even if we're adjusting it in a positive direction. So if someone actually great for us invites us on a date, shame might just say, nope. Specifically, it might say he's not really serious about you, or why bother, he'll reject you anyway as soon as he gets to know you, or just he's too good for you. And this especially happens with queer men because we often get the message that what we want or need is wrong or shameful. So we can avoid the love and connection we want because we've told ourselves we shouldn't want it, or we're not truly open to the sex we want because we've told ourselves that that's shameful too. And that sucks because it can really stop us getting what we want and need, but until we address the shame underneath, we often just stay stuck, accepting less than and avoiding what truly would fulfill us. And if this resonates, it doesn't mean you're wrong or broken, it just means you learn to tell a story about yourself that isn't accurate or fair. Second, we often compensate for shame by seeking external validation or approval. If you've read Alan Downs' The Velvet Rage, this is a huge theme there. If we fundamentally don't feel enough internally, we'll often look for external ways to fill that void with admiration, approval, or just attention. So we might go into overdrive trying to look hot and desirable, often at the expense of developing the emotional skills that actually sustain a strong connection. We might pick partners more out of what other people might think of him than what we think of him. Or we might end up chasing a lot of sex that momentarily makes us feel wanted, but leaves us still feeling empty and unloved after. And it's not that looking good or having lots of sex are bad in themselves, obviously. It's that when we're doing them for quick external validation, it's a weird kind of torture. Maybe we get a quick break from the feeling we're fundamentally not good enough, but it's exhausting, it feels inauthentic, and it often means our deeper and longer term needs stay unmet. These are really common patterns in our community. So again, if you've been there, and I have, you're definitely not alone. But also, unless we attend to the shame underpinning all of this and get our self-esteem internally more than externally, we often end up stuck in this pattern of doing things we might know aren't right for us longer term, but finding it really difficult to stop. Third, shame stops us taking emotional risks. So we might be even more cautious in flirting or showing interest, because if part of us feels fundamentally unworthy, the fear of getting a no can cut even deeper. So we're more likely to avoid situations where we might be rejected or ignored. Shame can also stop us taking emotional risks while in a relationship. It stops us speaking up about how we think or feel because we're afraid it'll lead to us being told we're wrong for feeling that way, its own form of rejection. Or again, just because we think we don't deserve to get what we want. Because shame can cause us to shrink ourselves in this way, to avoid rocking the boat, to avoid being honest about what we want, or just to avoid doing anything that might make other people feel negatively towards us, even if they're a close partner. But this only tends to leave us feeling unhappy or unfulfilled in the long run. Fourth, shame can create all kinds of emotional turbulence or overreactions that damage our close relationships. It can make someone's very reasonable boundary feel like a very personal rejection. It can make us reject other gay men for their authenticity because we resent that we're ashamed to step into our own. And it's a factor in why gay men often feel intimidated by other gay men's success, because we tell ourselves that that must make us unworthy by comparison. And these patterns are huge barriers to deeper connection. They can make very normal and even necessary interactions in a relationship feel deeply emotionally charged. They can make every discussion or disagreement feel like a referendum on who is worthy of getting what they want. Because again, in these cases, it's not really about someone else's boundaries or authenticity or success. It's about shame. It's about our inclination to look for signs that we're fundamentally not valid or not worthy. And these quote-unquote small things come up quite a lot in my coaching work, and they're honestly some of the subtlest but clearest indicators that shame might be impacting how someone is navigating their close relationships. They're very common, but also very human, just little ways that our fears we don't deserve what we want can show up in everyday interactions. And finally, fifth, perhaps the most annoying of all, shame can cut us off from personal growth, including the personal growth that would help relieve us of shame. I know, what a joke. I already mentioned that we can feel ashamed of feeling shame, which is basically a shame shit sandwich with a cherry on top. But that's kind of the key here. It's often said that our ability to grow in meaningful ways is proportional to the amount of truth we can tolerate about ourselves. So if we're prone to shame, that can mean we can't face the things about ourselves we're not necessarily proud of, and so we can't do anything about them. And sure, this doesn't mean the opposite of shame is to go hunting for every possible way we might be imperfect or flawed, but it is about asking yourself that if you did figure out you're doing something that's not in your best interests, how would you respond? Would you think, oh God, that must mean I suck, and just think about something else? Or could you think, okay, I'm human. I guess I just never thought about it that way before. I guess I just didn't know better. Because that makes a big difference. So yes, the more you can cultivate self-acceptance, which is really the true opposite of shame, and embrace honest self-reflection, even when that gets a bit uncomfortable, that's what lets you grow. The more you feel maybe a bit embarrassed by this sort of stuff for a moment or two, instead of fundamentally ashamed, the more you can say, hey, nobody's perfect, I'll just try something different in future. But this is why going deeper and unpacking the shaky self-worth that's often at the heart of all of this can really have an exponential benefit. We start to feel better, and we get better at learning to feel even better. If any of this did sound painfully familiar, clocking all of this can feel heavy sometimes, but that's just a necessary and important step in identifying and healing what's going on here. And speaking of which, if these are some of the ways that shame can impact how we show up in our relationships, what can we do about this? What are some of the ways we can tackle the shame at the source? Because again, the key here isn't that some people never experience shame, most people do. It's that some people are better prepared to combat shame when it turns up. Some people have learned to be better at saying bye, Felicia, to those shameful thoughts when they come up, so they can replace them with something more self-honoring and self-respecting instead. So here are some powerful ways to start doing more of that. The first thing is to get curious about what narratives or rationales you might be telling yourself in certain situations. If you face rejection or disappointment, are you telling yourself it's because you fundamentally don't deserve what you want? If you make a mistake, is it because you're human and humans make mistakes? Or is it because you think you're stupid or incompetent or just can't be trusted? From there, you can start gently reframing what happened. Maybe you did make a mistake and maybe it impacted someone else and you do feel kind of bad about it, but maybe you're still a fundamentally acceptable person. Or if someone turns you down, are you telling yourself on some level that means everyone is going to turn you down because why would anyone like you anyway? Or are you going to tell yourself that you still deserve to get what you're looking for? Maybe you just weren't the right match for him and you'll find what you need elsewhere. This is the key to shame resilience, building these responses that are just kinder and more accurate. Because shame resilience really is a habit. It gets easier and more natural the more you do it. So even subtle reframes can really help in the long run. Gently disrupting those well-worn patterns literally rewires how you think about yourself. And it's not about fixing or solving everything overnight. This can be heavy or emotionally intense work, but even just noticing these things with a bit more kindness can really help. Also, one of the most powerful ways to overcome shame is to talk about it with someone, especially someone capable of holding what's coming up for you without judgment or blame. And yeah, this is a huge benefit of working with a coach or therapist who's trained to do exactly that. Those supportive friends can do it too. At the same time, it's worth remembering that shame is something that's learned and not innate. Sometimes said that for queer people, our shame was never ours to carry, and that's huge. It's about saying we never deserved to feel like there was something wrong or negatively different about us. We're not responsible for the shame we sometimes feel, even if we are responsible for healing it. So yeah, for us, it's about trying to name and de-shame, or really name and reframe, and this is powerful and a process. But again, the more we do it, the more we default to doing it naturally instead of trusting those voices that aren't really us or even about us. They're just lies we learned somewhere along the way and can unlearn at any point. So there are a few things to think about, and if you want to reflect on this, try asking yourself whether there are any ways you're not fully allowing yourself to be yourself, maybe because you're afraid of what it might say about you. Are there any ways you're not allowing yourself to be fully connected, fully romantic, fully sexual, or just fully human? And if so, why? And if anything in this episode did bring up some new or just heavy feelings for you, that's okay. Shame can feel big and heavy, but it's also something we can name, soften, and eventually unlearn. And feeling the weight of it is often the first essential step in doing that. If you want some support identifying and reframing your inner dialogue, or just don't want to do it alone, it's one common thing I support gay and bi men with as a coach. Just go to bettergaydating.com to find out more and sign up for a free call. Thanks as always for listening. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next episode.